I'm Chance Dorland, and this is In-Depth, an interview program from expressnews.com with in-depth reporting and other resources for stories affecting San Antonio and Bexar County. San Antonio Express News staff writer Scott Huddleston recently reported on the uncertain future for Alamo Plaza's Christmas tree tradition and joins me now to give an update on where things stand as well as how they might look into the future. So, Scott, great to have you back here on the podcast. Let's first start by examining the tradition that has now been interrupted. How long had Alamo Plaza been the location for this yearly celebration? And I know it wasn't continuous. There was a gap.
Hi, Chance. Well, it's good to be speaking with you today. First of all, the celebration itself, what we call the tree lighting ceremony, has been around for about 30 years. This is the 34th year of that event, and it no longer is in Alamo Plaza, which is kind of the reason that we're having this conversation today, is just the idea of people adjusting to change. But the longer tradition of having a Christmas tree in this area called Alamo Plaza is something that dates back to at least to 1914. I used to do a column called Then and Now. It was a historical features column that appeared in the Sunday Metro section. And one week I was curious about this tradition of this giant Christmas tree in Alamo Plaza in front of the iconic Alamo Church, as we call it. And so I wanted to do some research to see how far back I could trace that back to, because I wanted to understand the cause and effect, the idea of then and now, knowing what has happened in the past and why it shapes what we do today. So I looked into our news archives and found a story from 1915 in the San Antonio Light. And there used to be a large Christmas tree that the Rotarians would basically build. It was an artificial tree built with kind of a telephone pole and a steel frame, and it was anchored with chains. So it was not a real tree, but it was built with cedar limbs and actual cedar trees and those kinds of things to fill in the frame. And the Rotarians would give away sweets and candy and toys to children. The Light reported in 1914 that about 500 children were, quote, made happy by the presents and the candy and cakes and toys and other things distributed by a real live Santa Claus. And so I know that tradition goes back more than a century, but the idea of the official city Christmas tree, what we now know today as a 50-foot plus tree, is no longer in Alamo Plaza. It's in a nearby place called Travis Park. And that's why we're having this conversation and why it's an issue today.
And of course, it goes without saying, Scott, that changes are afoot in Alamo Plaza for the entire area. So that's why this change was made. And this actually happened last year, correct?
Yes. Another driving force behind the change is the city felt that it didn't have enough space in Alamo Plaza to do the kinds of programming that it needed to do. For example, throughout December, there are going to be, caroling and other kinds of Christmas time activities. I think face painting and visits from Santa and those other kinds of things that they felt, Travis Park lends itself to more open space where they could do these kinds of things as opposed to what's occurring in Alamo Plaza, which is shifting from, civic uses to more of a historical kind of use. And that's what we've been talking about with this giant project known as the Alamo Master Plan.
And so what's really interesting about this is what I talked about at the beginning of today's episode, the uncertainty. So yeah, big changes going on in Alamo Plaza, lots of construction. But even after all that's completed, no one knows actually what's going to happen to this tradition, if it's going to stay where it is now or if it's going to move back where it's been for quite some time. And then, as you pointed out, even further back historically. So why is there uncertainty?
That relates to the Alamo master plan and the fact that there still hasn't been a final design for this area that we call Alamo Plaza and how it's going to be used. The concept is that it will be an open outdoor interpretive site that will complement an indoor museum right next to it. So what we're kind of in an interim phase where we have HEB, which is sponsoring the main official city Christmas tree in Travis Park. That will be a 50-foot tree, a real tree, a blue spruce. But in Alamo Plaza, HEB is gifting the city a 20-foot tree so that people can still continue that tradition of having their picture taken in front of the Alamo Church by a Christmas tree. And, it kind of begs the question, does size really matter when we're talking about Christmas trees when you're having a photograph taken? Because whether it's a 55-foot tree or a 20-foot tree, you still get the idea that your family is standing next to a Christmas tree with the Alamo Church in the background. So it's a change, but it's one that we're managing right now. In the longer term, as that design is developed for Alamo Plaza and as it will be used as an outdoor interpretive space related to historical interpretation of the mission and the battle site, it remains to be seen, will there still be a Christmas tree there, or will it be maybe somewhere else nearby and is still in Alamo Plaza, but outside of what we call the historic footprint. So it truly is an unknown. We don't know what that tradition will look like or whether it will be intact in any kind of form that relates to the context of what it has been in the past.
So, Scott, you ask an important question, does size matter? Does it matter if it's 55 or 30 or, perhaps a tree is a tree? But as you know, small questions like these, specifically with the Alamo, with Alamo Plaza, have been argued about for quite some time. We've seen a lot of that in the last several months, the last year. So I guess to some people, size and other small details do matter. So that being the case, how have San Antonians reacted to this? What have people been saying to you as you've been writing about this issue?
Well, the big change really occurred last year. And the initial reaction was people were saying, why do we want to have the official Christmas tree in Travis Park? Because it looks like it could be any other park in America. Whereas if you have a giant Christmas tree in front of the Alamo Church, that's an iconic photo that people will recognize as being in San Antonio. And so that's been the primary point of objection. But I think that we need to continue to study this, the way that San Antonio is evolving its tradition of an official Christmas tree, how we celebrate Christmas in Travis Park, how we celebrate it in Alamo Plaza. Because to me, the important tradition is, in the spirit of the Rotarians giving to the needy children back in 1914, how is that manifesting today? And do we have nonprofit groups that are doing those kinds of activities in Alamo Plaza or in Travis Park? Where's the spirit of giving? Where are we seeing that?
And then before we say goodbye, Scott, let's go back to kind of my initial question, talking about the history of this tradition. It's had different phases, and of course, we're kind of in the middle of a change of those phases, as you've already pointed out. So let's talk about how this tradition has changed over the years and as it continues to change now.
So when I did my research, I found that around the turn of the century, around 1900, Alamo Plaza was, kind of the town square, and there was a market there for cedars that had been cut in the hills to the north, and then hauled in on wagons and sold as Christmas trees. So that was occurring before there was, a quote official Christmas tree in Alamo Plaza, and then the Rotarians started having this artificial Christmas tree built. around 1914. That was the earliest that I could trace it back to. After that, after World War II, the city Parks and Recreation Department would build a 60-foot tall Christmas tree that weighed more than 18,000 pounds. And it was basically the same kind of construction, a steel frame and a telephone poles filled in with cedar trees and that kind of thing. And my understanding is it was quite a fire hazard, but I never was able to find any documentation of an actual fire. But in the mid 70s, the city shifted its focus to, having Christmas trees, holiday lighting on the Riverwalk and holiday decorations on the Riverwalk. So it kind of shifted after the 1968 World's Fair, hemisphere moved, in the 1970s to a focus on the Riverwalk as the center of focus for the holidays. And then in 1986, then Mayor Henry Cisneros decided that it would be great to bring back that tradition of having a Christmas tree in Alamo Plaza. And it was the Kroger supermarkets that was the first actual sponsor of a Christmas tree in Alamo Plaza. And we've had different grocery chains sponsor a Christmas tree in Alamo Plaza in the decades since then. And of course, HEB has been the sponsor of the tree in the most recent decades. So that's where we have been in recent times as far as a Christmas tree in Alamo Plaza. But we don't know what the future holds for that tradition.
And then I guess I do have one more question, Scott. That gap when you said that the city started focusing more on the Riverwalk, was there any opposition to that change, or is this opposition that we're talking about now maybe more of a more recent issue? Was there any sort of discussion on whether or not that was a good idea back when that happened?
I've never seen any documentation of that. It's possible, but keep in mind that there was not an official tree lighting ceremony before then. So, I don't think that the tradition was as, engendered and part of the community as it has become in recent years, where there's actually been a tree lighting ceremony in Alamo Plaza that occurred the day after Thanksgiving Day. And so I think that that's part of why people are kind of, shocked by the change that has occurred in the past year.
And a big thank you to San Antonio Express News staff writer Scott Huddleston for joining me for today's episode of the In-Depth Podcast, an interview program from expressnews.com. Have a great Thanksgiving Day week. And for the San Antonio Express News, I'm Chance Dorland.